All right, such a pleasure to have Christine with us. Christine from the Light Spirit Coaching. A lot of spirits are around us, I guess, right here, right? And we are diving into the world of ADHD today with Christine because she is an immense, compassionate guide to help women with ADHD, to help them to navigate changes in life, including receiving clarity and their support system instead of focusing on the critical judgment. So, Christine, so happy to have you here. So again, thank you so much for showing up and share about your journey, because I know part of your journey about being diagnosed as ADHD is in the latter part of your life, not in the very beginning, not in the very beginning, but would love for you to also kind of share some of the insights about being a highly sensitive person / introvert, and later on know about ADHD, being diagnosed as ADHD. How do you even navigate the world, this wild, crazy world these days? Would love to know.
Yeah, that's a tough question, Jen. It's So I knew from early on that I was a very sensitive soul. I was very anxious. I just thought everybody was anxious, though I didn't really realize that was a thing. And I knew I was also an introvert, and it took me a while to be okay with those things. And what happened, though, because of those things and not knowing that I was also had ADHD, I struggled. I struggled, and I had some things going for me in the way of loving to learn, and in the way of loving physical activity, and those are things that uh, can help when you have ADHD. That you want to learn, you want to understand.
How did you find out, though? Sorry to cut in, but how did you even find out you were diagnosed with ADHD? Like, obviously.
It was, yeah, boy, that's a good question. I wasn't diagnosed until I was in my 40s. And so what happened was, I would go to a therapist, and they would diagnose me with depression or anxiety, and it would help some, but it would never help. And it's like, what is wrong with me? What is wrong with me? What is wrong with me is a refrain of someone with ADHD often, especially before we know that we have ADHD, and sometimes even after we know that, because things that seem very simple can feel very difficult for an ADHD soul. And we can be very good at things that are really difficult for other people that they have trouble with, come to an ADHD person easily. And so my husband used to joke about, he had a brother who had ADHD. He's like, I think you have ADHD, but it was not said in a very nice way. And at the time, who wants to be ADHD? It's like, you think about people who are like, can't sit still and don't pay attention, and they get in trouble and all the things. And I didn't relate to any of that. So for women with ADHD, it's very different for many women who have ADHD, because we don't relate to a lot of the experience, the stereotypical ADHD little guy in the classroom who's getting in trouble, who's fidgeting, who's
right.
Because we're tend to be more maybe daydreamy in the classroom, or drift off, or have lots of interests, but it doesn't look like, I mean, how would you know it's ADHD? Because women, the whole field of an area to be studied for women with ADHD has come much more recently. Even studying adults with ADHD, people used to think that people outgrew ADHD. So thank goodness that's gone by the wayside. And now people understand that adults have ADHD too. And so I just began to wonder, it's like, well, then I started looking at all the little, checklists that you can do, and I'd go online to see. It's like, maybe I do, or what about this? It's like, well, I don't know. Kind of looks like it, but and so I finally got up the courage. Actually, it's interesting. I got up the courage to go see a psychiatrist who
Mm,
specialized in ADHD, in adult ADHD. And he diagnosed me with ADHD and suggested a ADHD med. And I was like, oh my gosh, is this what it's like for normal people? Is they can just like do their days like this without feeling like tired. One of the things with ADHD, it's yeah, so misnamed. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but this idea of it being having this hyperactivity piece, which for some people is true. They have trouble with just being still and just want
mm,
to move or need to do something.
mm,
But for others of us, the hyperactivity is much more mental. There's just like constant, very, very difficult to shut our brains off in a way that's much more difficult than other. I mean, everybody, all of us have like a gazillion thoughts going, but it's very difficult for an ADHD person to slow that down. And so when you take meds, I don't know all the science. Well, I do, but I'm not going to speak to that. I let other people do that who are better at speaking to that. I just know that for many people with ADHD, meds are very helpful. They're not right for everybody, which I think is important to say. I started out on ADHD meds. I'm taking a different med now, and I'm very grateful for that ADHD med because it makes my days easier. It
okay.
makes I feel like I'm better able to cope with the med.
Yeah, I'm just curious. So, when you were being diagnosed as ADHD, in that moment, what kind of feeling, or even probably perhaps like internal like judgment? Because I do want to explore with you, like, what's the myth and misconceptions that we tend to hold on to about being an ADHD? Like, oh my God, this is like a lifelong sentence, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It's,
well,
it's,
right.
it's not
It can
curable. It's not curable. And then now I'm doomed because I'm going to suffer my entire life or the remaining of my life, right?
wow, that's very well said. I think for many people that is what it feels like, because and I think for many people they don't want to be diagnosed because they don't want to confirm that that's what it is, that and
Right.
so people and me avoid it, avoid it, avoid it. It's like
Mm,
maybe it's true, but it's like no, it must be something else. It just because of whatever, this, that, or the other, or circumstances, or oh man, we're smart, we can come up with all these other ways we think that what it must be. And so there tends to come with so much more shame, partly because there have been all these messages, not only from other people, about being spacey, or why are you so spacey, or why don't you want to join us, or why don't you, I mean, there's so many negative, why can't you, or why are you, or why did you did that, or you know all the icky messages that we internalize. And then the I think the other thing that gets stuck is the especially because of the old stigma of ADHD originally, being with little guys squirmy fidgety, and getting in trouble, having trouble getting in trouble, having trouble fitting in, and looking like there's this weird notion that people have that like we could stop doing that if we wanted to, like those little guys could stop doing that if they wanted to, or that I could stop my brain from on its own and its own devices that'll just like. And so, yes, there are things that we can do with meds and with other strategies and learning meditation, and there's oodles of wonderful strategies that can be used. But there's just such I think leftover old stigma about what is ADHD. I think for people who have more knowledge
Mm.
and understand it and look at it from like a neurodivergent lens, and that it's not about wrong or bad, it's about this is how my brain works. I think I mean that in and of itself can be so healing.
Wow, I'm so grateful that you brought this up because, the word compassion, it can sound really much of a cliche, be compassionate. And it's like, what for? If we're living in this tough world, we just have to stand up for ourselves, with more of the assertiveness rather than that so-called kind, compassionate part of ourselves, right? It's not being invited. So I find this very pretty moved because you are inviting people to look at ADHD. Yes, there's a core symptom, probably impulsivity. I have that as a highly sensitive person. That impulsive things, I need to do something about it, right?
Mhm.
And not judging ourselves from the standpoint of, there you go, see, you're acting up again, or there's something wrong with you, right? And
Right.
a lot of those, that makes us feel like we are just too vulnerable to even control ourselves.
It's just our brain is just we're wired differently. We're wired differently, and when we can appreciate that,
Mm.
and I mean a lot of what I do is reframing how people are viewing what's going on, um, from with a perspective of, oh, it's because your brain thinks this way and it's this way. It's not because you're bad, you're wrong, you're awful, you're this is what your brain's doing and trying to do, and these are the gifts and these are the lovely things about it. Creativity is a big one, and these are the things that I want to say. These are the ways we don't fit in very well with much of the world. I think that's just so helpful. And when we can understand that and to keep catching the mean ways that we're speaking to ourselves and the judgmental ways that we're ourselves, and be able to turn that around into compassionate, compassionate ways of responding to ourselves. And actually, it's interesting that you brought this up about boundaries. Yes, we need good boundaries, especially when we're really compassionate. When we have good boundaries, it allows us to be compassionate more easily without being harmed in the process, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. Excuse me. So one thing that you just touched upon that really touched my heart too is like, we're not here to try to fit into a particular mode of, this is how it works for your brain. It works, operate this way, right? But then instead we honor there's different way of operating with different individuals, right? And so let's talk about highly sensitivity, because I'm a highly sensitive person, as you
Okay.
know. And yeah, we're highly intuitive as well. But at the same time, it's like the ADHD, I mean, women with ADHD, I probably assume that, they share this trait of that highly sensitivity and sometimes introversion as well. So when they are going through different life challenges or transitions in life, that's more major, more intense,
Mhm.
what would you suggest them to, yeah, I wouldn't say it's a self-help strategy, but what would you suggest them to incorporate in their daily routines or in a practical way so they feel supported? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I did think about this. This is in some ways, this is, yes, I do have things that I can certainly suggest, but it's interesting because this is so, and yeah, my brain is because of ADHD, because of creativity, because of all the things it thinks. And so, it's like, I can't just talk about this because it's about this and that other thing. But the other thing I'm thinking about with being highly sensitive and, and or having ADHD, and yes, I do think there's an overlap, and I'd love to learn more and look at the studies to see what kind of overlap. I don't know that, but
Yeah.
yes, I would totally say there's an overlap. Probably a good chunk, I would suspect. There's the other piece of that is that um, in general, ADHD folks also feel things very strongly. So, is that separate or is that part of being highly sensitive, or, is there a chicken egg? I don't know, but ha- having strong emotions is definitely a part of ADHD. And I suspect, it's also a part of being highly sensitive, because there's even more to feel more strongly because we just are feeling all the things, right? And we feel it very strongly. And so part of those strategies are about how, I mean, it goes back a little bit to what we were talking about a little bit, well, a little bit, a lot of it, to befriend ourselves, to be kind to ourselves and to be with other people who can offer us that kind of kindness.
Mm,
And ideally, to have friends who can say, it's like, gosh, yeah, I can't believe you just said that to yourself. I can't believe the ones we can really be honest and we're telling
right,
telling them
right,
exactly what's going on. To have those people in our lives who can kindly reflect that back so we can become aware of them, so we even have a chance
right.
to
Mm.
give ourselves some compassion. Actually, this is literally one of the things that I do when I think about being compassionate with myself, or when I'm having a hard time. I just put a hand on my heart. And it really, just, it's soothing. It's
It's
soothing.
nourishing. It's so nourishing.
Yes. And so that, I mean, really, and so that is a strategy, just to put, sometimes I even go, when I really need a lot, I'll put both hands on my heart. Just, it's a way of saying, I love you, you're okay. This may be really hard. It's just like a parent would with a very small child.
Mm.
Just kind of like loving them and reassuring them and about whatever it is, and just letting them know they're safe and they're okay and there's support there. I mean, so that can come partly from us, from ourselves when somebody else is not available, from spirit, the divine, whatever one would
Yeah.
call that thing. God is a common term for that. That's available to us, and ideally, people to be around at least somebody or some few people who understand, because they struggle with the same thing. There's healing in and of that, just being with other people who understand what that's like to be highly sensitive or to have ADHD or to have both things.
Yeah, there's such healing power in being seen and being understood and not being
Oh,
judged.
yeah. So
So,
I didn't, so I mean, so you asked for, so that's where I would start. Um, Physical activity is a biggie.
oh, yeah.
Um, because when we can, you know, amp down our bodies by using them and being, bringing mind body together, it's very it's very grounding. And so physical activity, ideally enjoyable physical activity, but whatever it is, can really help settle us a little bit. Meditation, yoga, relaxation exercises, breathing exercises, all those things help both with the highly sensitive soul and for the ADHD person.
Yeah.
Sleeping, enough sleep is for ADHD people
Mm.
is hard. It's a struggle for many of us with ADHD on some either not enough sleep or interrupted sleep.
Mm.
Um, and the better sleep that we can get, the more the less, the milder our symptoms will be. That, the flip side is true. With worse sleep, our symptoms get worse, and then it's harder to sleep because it's just not a good cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So are some of these things helping a little bit? I was just looking to see, what I got here.
Yeah, well, I think it's like having ADHD. Sometimes I heard people be like, "Oh, they judge themselves for being lazy or
Yeah. Yes.
unintelligent," right? Like, "Oh,
Yes.
I'm just not smart and I can't handle or I can't organize things," right? So I can't even do the basic minimum for myself. So
Yes.
that continuously like shouting in their brain and makes them feel very, very awkward when they're interacting in the social group.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. That reminds me, I think it was the first one. If it wasn't the very first one, it was one of the very first books for adult ADHDers a few decades ago.
Yeah.
Um, you mean I'm not lazy, crazy, or stupid? And it tagged exactly what was going through those of us, adults. It's like that we thought at one level, maybe not stupid, but like, it must not be smart, or what's wrong with me, or what's all the things that go along with it. But yeah, the lazy, because we have ADHD folks have trouble with getting started on a project, and there's lots of great strategies that are good for that, with finishing a project, and also doing a project at all if it's not something that's interesting. That's another whole bear in and of itself, to find ways to break down a project, or to that there was a old, gosh, it was supposed to be wisdom somehow, and I guess it works for some people. Eat the big frog first. Well, one, that just sounds gross to me. But two, it usually does not work for ADHDers. Do much better when we find the tiniest little interesting step so we can get started, or just something that's just so no brainer that we can just, like, turn your computer on, just go to the website. And then it's like we need to back way off, because our brains are like, seeing the whole project and the whole thing. And from there, it's really hard to engage with something, because it doesn't look like there's a clear step. And so we don't even think that it would be a step, like to go to the web page. It's like, yes, it is. Sometimes it's all it takes to like develop a little bit of momentum to be able to engage with that project.
I think what you share is just very self-caring tips. Really, it's very, very important to help ourselves to feel less overwhelmed because there's so much things going on, right? Constantly having that mental activity. It's hyper
Right,
here.
right, right, right,
Yeah.
right.
So
Great creative energy, but it's hard to make use of it sometimes when there's so much of it.
then we get frustrated out of those overwhelmed. And later on, I mean, the worst scenario is we start feeling that immense shame washing over us. Or
Exactly.
or even like, when
Exactly.
you're feeling like, oh my gosh, if somebody said an up, post an opinion about whatever you're doing or you're saying, then you start feeling like that sense of rejection. I mean, it's all really prevalent.
Oh yeah, the kindness and the self-talk and the compassion. Body doubling is another strategy that I'm thinking about, which it's called body doubling in the ADHD world, but it's otherwise known as co-working, and that can be really helpful, to know that somebody else is there, even if they're working on their own thing. Just to know, just it's a wonderful way of having both support and helping us be accountable in a kind way rather than a mean way or a harsh way. So
Also
you
a
get it like a buddy to work with you, huh?
safer space to be in, right?
Right, right, exactly, exactly. Yeah.
So
And
one thing I would, sorry, sorry to cut in,
right,
but One thing that I would love to explore with you is also the part that highly sensitive people tend to struggle with too, is the people pleasing part, the people pleasing syndrome. And then say, okay, so I'm an impulsive person. If astrologically speaking, yeah, I have a lot of Aries in my chart, right? I'm impulsive. I take actions and stuff like that.
Action soul, right, right, right.
So, but at the same time, reflecting back to my past, my learning lessons is like, oh my gosh, when I wasn't regulating my emotions and letting it, dominate the way I, just respond to my impulsivity. A lot of times I see how it contributes to my people pleasing, or yeah, back in the days, people pleasing.
Oh, yeah, not pausing, right?
Trying to earn people's approval, or trying
Yep.
to avoid conflicts, basically, because
Yeah.
you know what, I don't want to do anything wrong, I don't want to offend people. I mean, all those fears of rejection will come up, right? And then, due to lack of, when you mentioned earlier, self self boundaries, or boundaries with the external,
Mhm.
right? Or not being able to speak up for our needs.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. I scribbled some notes about this very thing that you're addressing, and it's I think whether highly sensitive or the impulsivity is for many folks with ADHD, the impulsivity, having trouble pausing, so before we take action or before we speak, or that so that we have that potentially wise pause to
Mhm.
assess whether or not that's the right thing to do. And I think there are, as you said, there are very good reasons when we well, as humans, we want to be included. We're social animals, we want to be part of. And when it feels like we're different or we don't belong, we're working really hard to find ways to belong and to be a part of. And so if we need to,
Survive.
in some ways go against what might be right for us, or just like that, it's like that's so important that this other little wise voice gets kind of drowned out. And so one just it's interesting. I'm in a boundaries study group right now that's just been such a wonderful blessing. And it just the awareness of, because I've learned about boundaries over the decades. I mean, I've learned, this and that and the other and the different techniques. And this has been so helpful to have just a small group of women that I'm a part of, to hear the minutia and the details of the little vulnerable details of how their lack of boundaries create crummy situations, and how they are ultimately not, that we're not doing well, or we're harming ourselves because we're not able to speak up, say some things, get out of there. Um and and oftentimes it's not just in response to, but it's a way of almost holding ourselves. um, the more that we learn about boundaries, the more it's kind of a way of holding oneself in the world. That is, it's like it becomes energetic boundaries. The more
Mm.
we get better at it. But there are, I mean, it's been so fascinating. There's this little motto about awareness, acceptance, and action, and you can't accept or take action if you don't have the awareness, or not good action.
Yes, we can't do a damn thing if we don't see anything, right?
Right, right. If you don't even know it exists. And so, yeah, so I've just learned so much more. And then it's such a safe place to come back to or check in with, to be able to practice, new things or different things that would be really hard without that kind of support with those folks who really understand. So I love helping people with boundaries, because it's such a big it's such a big area that I don't think it's enough attention.
Wow, it is. It is. I mean, that standalone can be another episode, I think.
Oh, yeah, well, we could
Right?
certainly,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, boundaries, and it's not only about boundaries with other people, but what about the boundary with ourselves? Are we clear about what we want and what we don't want? So, like,
Right, and what we allow ourselves to do or to not to do.
exactly. And not
Mhm.
feeling bad. Where's that feeling bad fine line still stands at, right?
Yeah, and sometimes setting a perfectly good, kind, respectful boundary can feel terrible because we're not used to what that feels like. That's
Feel
the thing,
mean.
it's so hard.
We feel like we're mean. So,
Right, that it feels mean or that they may not necessarily respond well because, probably we're responding differently than we did before, and that other person is like, "What's wrong with," and it's because it's new. People tend to maintain the status quo. We wanna keep things the way they are, and people notice when things are different, but it might be a very good change ultimately really for them as much as it is for us. Ultimately, it is the best thing for other people because if we're doing something that's really not right for us, it's ultimately no good for them either. It really isn't.
I heart you, like heart. I really heart you. Beautifully said, Christine. So, okay, so I'm aware of time, but then thank you for again showing up with so much insight and your wisdom about ADHD. Um, One last little points to invite you to probably guide anyone who's watching this. What is one way, like whatever the popping in your mind, your creative mind right now is going to help people to lessen their anxiety? I mean, for people with ADHD or wonder if they have ADHD, to lessen that decrease of anxiety besides medication.
Yeah. Um, I can't just say one. I'll be quick though.
Yes.
Um, yes, and my heart goes out to all those
Mm.
folks with the anxiety because I understand anxiety really well. You know what, the first thing that I would say goes back to, like, no matter what is going on, but especially when it's difficult and when we're afraid, to do that hand on heart or hands on heart, to remember um, that you can be there for yourself. Um, Aside from, the encouragement to find somebody that you can confide in, that you can who can be helpful with helping you with that anxiety. And the other two really that I think are really key, well, the other three, sleep, please address sleep and so that you get enough and good quality sleep. I actually wear a snore guard now. So, and that has helped my sleep and I do better with that. And physical activity, because that can help pull our overall anxiety down. Certainly in the moment, but it has a general flattening effect to help pull our anxiety down. And any kind of um, meditation, yoga, relaxation, those are those are the things that offhand that I think can be very, very helpful.
Thank you. So if it's
Mhm.
not enough for you here, hug yourself more. That feels really good. Seriously. Yeah. Okay. So where can people find you, Christine? Your amazing service.
Well, thank you. So my people can find me at my website, lightspiritcoaching.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn as Christine Weddle. And I have a Facebook page, Light Spirit Coaching. And I just started playing around with Instagram. I have a few things on Instagram, and I'm also there at Light Spirit Coaching.
Amazing. All right. So people, where to look for Christine, and, you can see and feel her presence of being such a beautiful, sweet support. If you feel called to explore into the arena of ADHD, even though you are not diagnosed, but you just wonder, she is amazing guide. And
Yes, especially if you wonder. I love working with those people, because I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. I really just want to offer some compassion and some help and some guidance towards what might be next.
awesome. And there we go. And we'll look forward to co-creating to see another episode about boundaries, maybe.
That would be fun. Thank you, Jen. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for the time today. I
Thank
really appreciate it.
you. Thank you, Christine. Thank you, everyone. Bye.